Welcome to the Roy Morgan Quarterly Update for November 2024. Shortly, I'll discuss the new rankings in brand trust and distrust, and then I'm going to do a deep dive into the social media industry, revealing findings from a brand new survey. But first, there's breaking news. After 3 years as the nation's most trusted brand, Woolworths plummeted to become Australia's second most distrusted brand, and Coles became the third most distrusted. But more on that later. Australia is rapidly becoming a fragile nation. We're in the middle of extraordinary technology-driven change and disruption with automation, AI, social media and fake news. It's terrifying. In the aftermath of COVID and amidst all these changing things, we're generally feeling less in control of our destiny than I've ever known. At the heart of this fragile nation is distrust and erosion of trust, the foundation of all human interactions. For a comprehensive introduction to the Roy Morgan Trust and Distrust approach, including early indicators and analysis by things like age, gender, geography, customer, non-customer, ask Roy Morgan. But today, let's start with the key industry net trust and net distrust rankings. By way of quick introduction, we roll up every mention of a brand into an aggregated industry sector and then report on that. Last quarter, I reported the supermarket industry was the biggest loser. Well, the pain continues. Year on year, supermarkets have gone from being the #1 most trusted industry category to become the 5th most distrusted. This has been driven by soaring distrust in Coles and Woolworths. So supermarkets are now more distrusted than the government and government services, more distrusted than the energy sector, more distrusted than media, apart from social media, and even more distrusted than mining and petroleum. We've never seen this before. Telecommunications is once again the most distrusted sector by a long shot. That means it's the sector with the highest net distrust score, calculated by subtracting distrust from trust scores. This unenviable ranking is due entirely to Optus, still struggling to repair its reputation after its data breach scandal. But what's happening with individual brand winners and losers? I've said Australia's rapidly becoming a fragile nation, so brand trust has never been more important. Bunnings remains the nation's most trusted brand. Behind Bunnings, Aldi's second, followed by Kmart, Toyota and Apple. Interestingly, the Commonwealth Bank improved 7 places, and Australia Post is knocking on the door of a top 5 position. Now, one to watch in this cost of living crisis is Chemist Warehouse. After a reputational dive in the post-COVID years, Chemist Warehouse is again the most trusted pharmacy brand in Australia and well back into net trust territory, just 5 rankings outside the top 20. When examining net trust score trends for the top 3 most trusted brands, Bunnings you'll see is consistently ahead of Aldi and Kmart. Both Bunnings and Kmart have maintained steady performance over the past 5 years. In contrast, Aldi experienced a decline during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was in direct opposition to the rise of Coles and Woolworths during that time. But this trend has now completely reversed. Woolworths and Coles, as we've said, have significantly declined, while Aldi has just steadily improved. Woolworths and Coles are caught in a toxic lockstep of distrust. Looking at our lead indicators for the next quarter, we project that the reputational decline of Woolworths and Coles is showing no real signs of recovery. But more on that in the December quarterly results early next year. So that's trust. But what's happening with the most distrusted brands? Woolworths, the second most distrusted brand in Australia, with Coles close behind. Now, this shift in distrust dynamics has pushed Qantas and Facebook Meta out of the top 3 most distrusted spots. And this is the first time since the inception of Roy Morgan brand distrust rankings that Facebook Meta is not in the top 3. But as we'll see shortly, it's not because we're more trusting now of social media. Qantas improved 2 rankings, partly reflecting improvements under the new CEO and partly reflecting Woolies and Coles pushing it down the rankings. Losers also include Shein, which has now joined Amazon and Temu in the top 20 most distrusted brands, highlighting the growing scepticism towards these major players in the Australian e-commerce landscape. Now, this is definitely a space to watch. Now to our deep dive. Each quarter, I focus on a different pressing issue, and this time, the spotlight is on Australia's social media landscape, an issue that's increasingly shaping the future of how we think, learn, create, and communicate. As author Eric Qualman says, we don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it. Simply put, the quote means that while we can't avoid social media, we do have individual control over how we use it and its impact on our lives. This ties into Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's social media ban for children under 16, announced on the 8th of November, aiming to protect mental health and safety. While limiting access for kids may be part of the solution, the real challenge may be more complex, but more of that later. Let's now explore why Australian consumers so distrust the social media sector. Thanks to Optus pushing the telecommunications sector into the most distrusted slot, social media has moved to second place. In other words, social media is now the second most distrusted industry in Australia. Looking back over the last 5 years, it's clear that social media has consistently been more distrusted than trusted. Just look at all that red. In early 2022, social media platforms faced unprecedented distrust as revelations about invasive data practices, algorithmic manipulation, disinformation, and mental health impacts painted them as exploitative and prioritising profit over user well-being. The distrust improvement since 2022 has, however, had more to do with the negative issues fading from memory than any positive correction. Platforms like Facebook Meta, Twitter X, TikTok and Instagram continue to dominate the most distrusted brands. YouTube, though, has emerged as a rare exception. YouTube is now ranked as the first social media brand to be more trusted than distrusted. This just might be a pointer to a more positive direction for social media. Now, this chart compares social media, the dark colour, with all brands. That's the light colour. And we see that privacy is the dominant issue. The top reason Australians distrust social media brands is that they do not protect or respect privacy. Interestingly, being dishonest, unethical or fake all come in less for social media than general brands in the broader economy. And I have to say I find that surprising. And Facebook is the poster child for distrust due to data privacy. Just look at what respondents say, and I quote, "Facebook is known for data and privacy breaches, for selling information in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for not protecting users from scammers and providing a lack of data privacy." Across all voting groups, Facebook Meta is distrusted for privacy and dishonesty, but the depth of concern varies. Greens voters are most critical of privacy issues and are highly critical of Meta's profit motives. Dishonesty worries LNP voters the most. ALP and Green voters share similar concerns about Meta's ethics. Conversely, the Australians who do trust Facebook do so because it has a legal obligation to obey privacy laws. So there's a framework, they believe, and because they have no real personal problems with the platform. I'd call this praise by faint damnation. TikTok's distrust is rooted in the belief that TikTok mines users' data by tracking what they watch and look for, and then shares this private data with third parties without consent. A major concern is its connection to China, with many Australians believing the Chinese Communist Party could misuse the data. TikTok is distrusted for different reasons across the political groups. So ALP and Greens voters are most concerned about privacy. LNP voters are more likely to focus on TikTok being foreign owned. Both Greens and LNP voters see TikTok as dishonest, with the Greens particularly worried about ethics. ALP voters view TikTok as the least safe overall. They're the most worried. Reasons for trusting TikTok point to the platform's democratic nature, where anyone can have a fair voice, and trust in its leadership, citing the CEO's transparent responses to the US Senate questions. Now looking at X. Looking at why Australians distrust X, we see it's largely due to perceptions of dishonesty and the spread of disinformation, and its unwitting cousin, misinformation. Some believe Musk is using X to promote far-right ideologies and extremist views. As an aside, Amazon's third biggest selling bumper sticker declares, "I bought this before we knew Elon was crazy." Regarding Twitter X, LNP voters are most concerned about dishonesty. Greens voters are the most critical of ethics, and more Greens than any other party supporters view Twitter or X as untrustworthy. Privacy concerns all groups, with the Greens being the most concerned. Australians, though, primarily trust X on free speech grounds, seeing Musk as a defender of transparency and free expression. One respondent said that after Musk's takeover, he revealed that Twitter had, under pressure from governments including the US and Australia, censored factually accurate COVID-19 information, raising concerns about free speech violations. Obviously, all well before he took over. Now let's turn to a snap poll we conducted in early November, exploring how Australians feel specifically about social media and the internet. The results are fascinating. Respondents were asked if social media causes more problems than it solves, or solves more problems than it causes. And the answer was a resounding yes. 3/4 of Australians, 74%, agree social media is more of a problem than a solution. And that's up from 68% in 2020 and 71% in 2022. It's a growing concern. Only 26% believe social media solves more problems than it creates. So this increasing trend reveals a growing concern among Australians about the negative impacts of social media outweighing its benefits. When asked why people believe social media causes more problems, the biggest response was that it spreads disinformation and its unwitting cousin, misinformation. That represents a 43% increase since 2022, showing an even more significant leap of, in fact, 175% since 2022, is the belief that social media is bad for young people. This signals a growing focus on how social media affects the younger generation, shifting the narrative from disinformation to its broader impact on development and well-being. As I said earlier, we're watching this play out in the government's bid to ban social media for Australians under 16. When asked why, what makes you believe that social media causes more problems than it creates, Australians said it helps bring people together, and that's a good thing, 9%, that was up from 5% in 2022. The belief that it makes life easier and more convenient has nearly doubled, 4%, up 2%. Unquestionably, Australians are shifting from a broad criticism of social media to recognising that specific platforms or users are causing the problems. The proportion of Australians who blame specific sites or users rather than social media itself doubled from 3% to 6%. So, given the social media bill before Parliament, how do Australians feel about the government's ability to regulate social media? In August, we ran a snap poll on whether Australians trust the government to regulate the energy sector. Let's compare that to our very recent poll on social media. So in August, we reported that 2/3 of Australians did not trust the government to make decisions about the future of energy. 66% said no. Then when we asked about regulating social media, 59% said they didn't trust the government. However, the proportion trusting the government is higher for social media, 41%, than for energy, 34%. These numbers, I think, reveal that Australians are generally sceptical of government decision-making, but see the regulation of social media as more within its competence than energy policy. Let's now turn to the internet rather than social media. When asked whether the internet creates more problems than it solves, the proportion of Australians saying yes has risen from 33% in 2020 to 41% in 2024, showing growing concern over its negative impacts. That said, the internet is still viewed more positively than social media. And this trend reinforces the view that Australians increasingly blame individual platforms and digital tools rather than the internet or social media as a sector. When asked why they felt the internet creates more problems than it solves, Australians most commonly cited spreading dis and misinformation and fake news, which rose from 25% in 2022 to 30% in 2024. Interestingly, issues like scams and cybercrime dropped from 8% in our worries to 6%, and social disconnection dropped from 12% to just 7%. Overall, however, rising concerns about dis and misinformation suggest Australians are increasingly sceptical of the internet's role in shaping and delivering trustworthy information. When asked what makes you believe the internet solves more problems than it creates, Australians most commonly highlighted ease of access to diverse information. That recorded a jump from 41% to 55% in 2024. The belief that the internet makes life easier and more convenient also grew 33% to 42%, while other factors like staying connected showed smaller increases. The growing emphasis on accessibility and convenience indicates that Australians increasingly value the practical benefits of the internet, even as concerns about its drawbacks persist. Finally then, what insight can we draw from the data and its emerging themes to plot a digital path to the future? The first positive step in this troubled space would be for social media platforms to accept a robust digital duty of care for the content that they promote and encourage. This is where their duty of care comes to life. The lack of trust in the government's ability to manage social media highlights the need for collaboration between independent regulators, technology companies, and user advocacy groups. This approach balances power and ensures diverse perspectives in decision-making, fostering accountability and public trust in the platforms. Criticism by our respondents of platforms like TikTok and Twitter X for their warped or biased algorithms sets the scene for a likely shift towards what's being called ethical algorithm design, where transparency and fairness are prioritised. No social media owner can control all of the content on their platform. They can, however, control their algorithms to enable fairness and equity. Fourth, since platforms like YouTube are more trusted than others in the social media category, this signals a trend where platforms focusing on educational, creative, and community-driven content gain a trust advantage. This would shape the future positioning of platforms towards utility and positive societal impact over bullying and disinformation. Finally, the erosion of trust in centralised platforms like Facebook and TikTok is accelerating the development of decentralised internet models like Mastodon or Web3, where users maintain control over their data and content. And AI can play a transformative role in this shift by curating personalised ethical user experiences, identifying and removing harmful content without bias, and fostering healthier online interactions. This combination of decentralisation and AI will offer a path to reinvent toxic social media by prioritising user empowerment and trust. And that's a wrap for another quarter. But before I finish, I'd like to express deepest sympathy from the entire Roy Morgan family to Lisa Ronson's family. Lisa died suddenly and tragically on the weekend. We have lost a respected client and a personal friend. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for a whole range of these and other Roy Morgan data and insights, or contact Ask Roy Morgan roymorgan.com. Thank you for joining me today. See you next time.